right, so hello everyone. So as Bria mentioned, my name is Brian Mattis, and I've been a researcher here at the lake for about 9 years. I'm in charge of the entire survey program here at the lake, just starting this year. So I get to spend a lot of time working on the water, and it really is just truly magical. I don't know who was out yesterday, but it was a really great start to summer. So what is the Jefferson Project? It's a project that is a partnership between IBM, RPI, and the Lake George Association. Our mission is to create a high-resolution view of the lake's ecosystem to make informed decisions to protect our lake. We're all about letting the science drive us towards the answers. We believe that high-frequency data monitoring, it holds the key to many lake phenomena. So we've installed over 500 sensors to monitor Lake George. And when I say that, I mean it. I have to calibrate all of them. It's a lot. That's above and below the water, by the way. So we have weather stations, floating platforms, and even acoustic instruments. You can view the data dashboard at jeffersonproject.live, which I highly recommend. I talk to most people here at your docks. I really recommend you do that. You can see current sensor measurements. You can see weather forecasts for your specific location, and you can even see summaries on decades of lake health. Now, the reason I'm here today is to talk about harmful algal blooms, or HABs for short. So you're going to hear the acronym HABs quite a bit today, so I apologize for that. So what are HABs? They are high densities of cyanobacteria, also referred to as blue-green algae, which are naturally occurring organisms that can sometimes be harmful. These are not invasive species like a lot of people think. They are actually one of the original and oldest organisms on the planet. So cyanobacteria in the oceans are responsible for the air that you're breathing right now, and that was 3.5 billion years ago. So when their numbers grow out of control, a dense concentration of cyanobacteria can look like green paint on the surface of the water. And as Jim mentioned, Chautauqua Lake, I've worked on other lakes in this region, and when you see a true HAB, a large, severe HAB, it is shocking. I didn't even know what I was looking at first, because the water is so still and green that it looks like you're on land. So, again, very shocking to see. And HABs can potentially be toxic, but we have not observed this yet in Lake George. That has been confirmed by outside laboratories, and since these have started to occur here, we have partnered with a toxinologist at RPI to test our water for toxins. And I note that we will say potentially toxic here because not all types of cyanobacteria are capable of producing toxins. We are working with geneticists to get a better understanding of the cyanobacteria community here at Lake George, and that way we can track their dynamics over the years to see if our community is changing throughout time. So, now let's get to the actual mechanism of why HABs are occurring at Lake George. We know that external nutrients are fertilizer for HABs. They're the same as the plants that you have in your gardens. Like most photosynthetic organisms, they need more than sunlight just to grow. There must be an availability of nutrients from another source, and these nutrients are making their way into the lake, typically because of things like climate change and development. With climate change, it has resulted in fewer, more intense storms, according to a study from NOAA, and this means that more sediments and nutrients are being washed into the lake after these intense storms. So, we've all seen these big rainstorms that come through and how much they rush everything into the lake. So those intense storms are carrying more than ever before. And more development always means more of an impact on a lake. That's plain and simple. So the stormwater runoff and septic issues are usually the main culprits here. So the algae cells we are concerned about overwinter on the bottom of these shallow bays. Once ice off occurs, dormant cells begin growing right away on the lake bed. Now remember I mentioned climate change, right? So if we continue to see winters like the one that we just had, where there was almost no ice coverage, the growing season for this can continue to expand. So as we do this and we're going to have less and less ice coverage, that means that they can start growing earlier in the season, which could lead to more and more harmful algal blooms. The picture that you can see here, I'm actually going to call someone out. The picture you can see here is from last October. This was a HAB that we experienced in Basin Bay, and it was actually at Matt Finley's property. So we have a microscope that I can take out in the field, and we can immediately identify that this is Dolichospermum, and these are aconites, meaning the seed that it grows from. And as they're emerging into the water column and rising to the surface, we were able to capture it as it happened. So, next, as the summer goes on and we experience a few storms, these dormant cells are receiving a delivery of nutrients from nearby wetlands and streams. Streams are often colder, and when that cold water hits the lake, it isn't a matter of simply mixing and diluting. That colder water immediately sinks to the bottom of these shallow bays, flowing right over the developing colonies. So those nutrients are being delivered right to where these algae cells are living. Then those colonies are pulled up from the bottom of the lake by wave action in these shallow bays. I'm sure you've all seen the water clarity change after windy days. You can go out to your dock and you can see all those particles floating in the water. That's exactly what we're talking about here. Sediment is being dragged up from the bottom by internal waves, carrying these algae colonies with it. So what's key here is that these colonies of algae are growing below the surface still, so they're out of our sight. When you look in the water, this isn't going to be very obvious. These colonies are actually fairly large compared to what's called phytoplankton. So those are very small. That's the reason the water is greenish. So these colonies are much larger, actually visible by the naked eye, but a lot more dispersed. And keep that in mind, because the reason that we're having an issue with tracking all this, we only really see it when it comes to the surface, right? So we kept that in mind, and we have built vertical profilers here at RPI. So we needed sensors that were actually able to capture this information. So with that in mind, we built these to sorry, just skipped a sentence. We built vertical profilers, which I hope you've all seen around the lake. These are built in-house at RPI at our engineering facility. And even further, we've discovered that the typical measurement frequency, which is normally 1 per second, we take 1 data point per second, was not enough. As these are rising through the water column, we weren't able to capture this with traditional monitoring. We were able to increase it to 4 hertz, which is 4 data points per second. We were able to see a completely different trend. So that means that a lot of other lakes around the world, they're using just off-the-shelf vertical profilers and sensors. They're not actually capturing the information that they need. So they don't know what's leading up to the actual surface bloom. So now, finally, that the algae colonies are awake and happy, the calm weather we typically experience in the fall gives the colonies the perfect situation to come to the surface for even more light. This is possible because cyanobacteria are able to regulate their buoyancy, so they can float up and down according to the conditions that they need. This accumulation of colonies can be so dense that it looks like green paint on the surface of the water. And just like with most other organisms, once their population peaks and they have kind of run out of food, they sink back to the bottom and go dormant, starting the cycle all over again. So, just to summarize here, we have external nutrients that are making their way into the lake. We have these dormant algal cells that are growing in the early season on the lake bottom. Those cells are then pulled up from the lake bottom by internal waves, and they continue growing below the surface. And then finally, we have calm weather in the fall that is causing them to come up to the surface looking for more light. Now, I do want to mention that this is a very simplified version of this explanation. My first slideshow I sent to the LGA was like 4 hours long, so they said, don't do that. So I'm saying this so that you can recognize that this is a very complicated global issue. Literally every water body in the world should be looking into this. So there are many scientists, we get together for conferences all the time, that are trying to understand this. So I'm proud to be working at a lake that is taking such large steps in understanding how these HABs are occurring, and I encourage you to come find me after this, and please talk to me about any questions that you have. And that's all.